I guess a little explanation is in order before I start. I'm a bit of a gun geek, along with all sorts of survival strategies, tactical gear, binoculars, flashlights, and so on. I have quite a lot of these things, and the pearl of my collection is a Remington 700 model rifle. You can legally buy it in Russia after 5 years of owning a smoothbore. I have a couple of very good telescopic sights for it, one more powerful, the other weaker. Not that I'm some kind of nut, but let's just say I like to feel prepared for trouble in our troubled times. Well, that, as I said, is the backstory, and the story goes like this. I once had the chance to rent an apartment in one of the parts of the northeastern district of Moscow. I rented it because of industrial necessity. I wasn't going to stay there for long, so I signed a contract for a couple of months only. The apartment was on the top floor of a 12-story building. The view from the windows would have been gorgeous if it weren't for one, but opposite, 200 meters away, stood another 12-story building, and except for it I could see almost nothing from my windows. My apartment was cheap, and it didn't even have a TV set. I wasn't going to get internet there either. I was going to move out soon anyway, so there wasn't much entertainment, to put it bluntly. As luck would have it, there was less work than I thought. So I spent my evenings reading, and then, when it got dark, I took up my rifle and played peepers. I invented this amusement for myself on the 3rd day of my stay in that apartment. I was adjusting the sight, looking through it at the street, estimating distances to different objects, accidentally looked through a couple of windows, and somehow got carried away. Then I dragged a desk to the window, set my Remington with a scope on it, and threw a slit in the curtains. I began to study the residents of the house across the street. From then on I spent almost every evening like that. Sure, you can judge me, and I'll agree with you. There's nothing good about looking at people through the crosshairs of an unloaded gun. But damn it, once I tried it, I couldn't stop. The house across the street was a horde of colorful characters. The man from the 6th floor who watched spicy videos every night quickly bored me. The little karate kid from the 9th floor who gave himself a merciless daily workout in the kitchen, and the young couple from the 7th floor became my favorites. This couple, by the way, was very hot, and for the few days I'd been watching them, they'd been doing it in every way I knew how, and they clearly weren't going to stop. They also didn't seem to know how to turn off the lights in their bedroom. Watching them was endless. I hoped to learn a lot from them. There were also alcoholics, interesting only during their drunken fights, divorcees with children, more or less normal families in general, a lot of things. But this story is not about them. One day, during another peeping session, I accidentally looked through a window on the 8th floor, which I had never looked through before. I saw an almost empty room, illuminated by the only light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The door was tightly closed. There was a bed in the corner, on which a man was sitting in a classic yoga pose. He caught my attention by his stillness, so I decided to observe him. The man sat with his back to the window and stared at the wall. He was very thin, pale and tall. His completely bald head seemed disproportionately large, and he was not wearing a t-shirt or pants. I stared at him for about 5 minutes, but he never moved. I moved the scope to the wall where he was looking. The wall was empty as far as I could see. No paintings, no rugs, and the faded wallpaper was peeling in places. I looked around the room. Nothing interesting. A couple of chairs, a coffee table with a pile of newspapers, an old armchair, a small rug on the floor by the bed. On the closed door I noticed a few obscure vertical stripes, and that was it. I decided that the dude was just meditating and I shouldn't expect any tricks from him, and then I switched to my favorite karate player, who was just warming up for another training session. An hour or two later, when both the little fighter and the restless couple had finished their performances, I looked out the window at Yogi once more. He was still sitting in the same pose, staring at the wall. After waiting about 30 seconds, I put the rifle away and went to bed. I probably would have forgotten all about it if I hadn't mistakenly looked in that Yogi's window again a couple days later. I didn't see anything new, and that made me angry for some reason. Admittedly, I had already seriously thought that every tenant across the street was obligated to entertain me every night. This guy just sat there staring at the wall. Or maybe he wasn't staring, but maybe he was sleeping sitting up. Maybe he's not even alive. I mean, maybe it's a doll. Or maybe he's really dead. He meditated and went into the astral. Anyway, I was interested in it. I watched him for an hour and he didn't move. Definitely a doll. Moreover, he was so thin and tall, his head was huge, his skin was pale, his hands seemed to be almost up to his knees. There are no such people. But what's this doll doing alone in a room? Is this room a prop warehouse? Where's the rest of the stuff? Why doesn't anyone come into the room? Is the apartment empty? If so, who turned on the lights? I looked around at the neighboring windows. To the right, as far as I can imagine the layout, is clearly another apartment. A family with 2 small children lives there. And on the left, dark windows, no lights on. Okay. I decided to distract myself, but neither the karate player nor the amorous naturalists pleased me. That the next day I came home early from work and immediately took a closer look at the scope. The bastard's sitting there, same position, although I think he's turned a little to the side now. So something's going on up there. I've been watching all night. I didn't even go to the bathroom. I'm sitting here. I'm looking through the scope, and he's sitting there, staring at the wall. I think he's barely breathing, or maybe it's just my imagination. When my eyes got sore, I gave up and went to bed. I took another look this morning before I left for work. No change. So I watched him for a week, a couple of minutes in the morning and several hours in the evening. Every now and then his position would change slightly, but how and when it happened I didn't see. One day I came home from work and saw that the sheets on his bed had changed. So I decided to give the bastard a 24-hour surveillance. It took me all evening, but I was satisfied. I aimed the rifle at the window and attached a video camera lens to the eyepiece of the scope with a tripod. It wrote the video directly to my laptop's hard drive, so I could see what happened during the few hours I would be at work. In the morning, I checked everything again and, pressing record on the camera, left the house. I was disappointed on the first day. The camera recorded everything honestly, and the yogi sat on the bed without moving for the whole 8 hours of the video. I barely had the patience to repeat the whole procedure the next day. The second time I was lucky. In the evening, while watching a video, I saw the door to Yogi's room open at 2:17 p.m. and a woman walked in with a tray in her hands. At first I thought she was going to feed him, but there was hardly anything on the tray. All I saw was some kind of vial and a few small boxes. The woman slowly walked over to Yogi and placed the tray in front of him on the bed. For a while she stood next to him and looked at him. I thought they were talking, but when I looked closer, I saw that her lips weren't moving. Then she began to rub his left hand, and then she leaned tensely against him for a few seconds. What exactly she was doing couldn't be seen because Yogi's skinny back was in the way, but it looked like she was giving him a shot in the arm. At least that was my impression. Then she walked strangely, sideways somehow, to the window, opened the vent, and lit a cigarette. After smoking the cigarette, she closed the window, took the tray and staggered out of the room, closing the door behind her. Nothing more happened. I took my eyes off the monitor and looked through the scope. Everything in the room was exactly the same as on the last frames of the tape. If it hadn't been for the camera, I wouldn't have known anyone had been there. I watched the video again. There was something strange about it, even frightening, even though it seemed to make sense. There's a pale, skinny dude sitting motionless on a bed, probably not right in the head or something. His nurse comes in, gives him a shot, smokes a cigarette, leaves. I rewatched the video again and again. Without deciding anything, I checked the scope on my ward one more time. The bastard was still sitting there, so I went to bed. Over the next week, using my surveillance system, I determined that A. The woman with a tray comes into the room every other day around 2:15 p.m. She gives a shot, smokes a cigarette and leaves. B. Nothing else seems to happen in the room. However, it was all starting to become an obsession. First of all, I never saw him change the sheets. Second, I seemed to understand what was odd about the woman's behavior. I saw her come into his room 3 times and never, not for a second, did she turn her back on him. I watched him for a few weeks. It felt like work. During that time, they changed his sheets one more time, but I never saw it. I don't know how it happened, unless it was at night when I was sleeping. I also found out that a couple times a week a woman from his apartment goes somewhere for 30-40 minutes. I've seen her leave the entryway and come back in with a couple of bags. A few times I was able to follow her. She would go to the nearest grocery store, and on her way back she would stop at a drugstore. I tried to find out what she bought at the pharmacy, but she took the receipt with her, and I didn't dare to ask the pharmacist. Every 2 days, a woman would come into his room, give him an injection, smoke a cigarette, and leave. She never turned her back on him for a second. I studied his room thoroughly. I thought a lot about the stripes on the door, the peeling wallpaper. The stripes on the door are peeling paint, and it was peeled off by the same thing that peeled off the wallpaper, the nails on his hands. I had no reason to think that was the case, but I couldn't find any other explanation. He was beginning to scare me. I'd look at him through the scope, stare at the back of his head for hours, and he'd just sit on his bed in the corner. It was especially creepy to see little kids in the next apartment playing and jumping on the couch. And behind the wall, actually a couple of meters away from them on the bed, sitting this freak. I knew something had to be done, but I couldn't think of what. Should I call the police and tell them what? Well, they would come, ring the doorbell. They wouldn't open the door. And then what? I was exhausted. I dug through the internet, but found nothing but the standard scare stories. Although one pasta, I think, did have something to do with it. I tried to find out something from the residents of the house, but nobody seemed to know anything about it. Finally, I decided to do the most idiotic thing I've ever done in my life. I was well prepared. I took a couple of my best knives, a traumatic revolver, a mask to hide my face, lockpicks, a flashlight, firecrackers for distraction, a smoke bomb. I scattered it all in my pockets, trying not to look suspicious and not to rattle with every step, then went outside, sat on a bench at the entrance and waited. If the cops had decided to get to me at that moment, I would have been in a lot of trouble. Sometimes I wish that had never happened. The funny thing was that at that time, sitting on the bench, I had no idea what I was going to do. About 40 minutes later, I saw the woman from that apartment leave the house and go her usual way towards the store. I definitely had half an hour of time. I got up and went into the entrance from which she had left. I went up to the 8th floor. The door to the lobby was unlocked, so I opened it. I found myself in the middle of a dimly lit hallway, one end of which was incredibly cluttered. Along the walls were metal bedbacks, a bicycle without wheels, skis, sleds, some dusty boxes, scraps of wooden furniture, and there was a wheelchair. For some reason it caught my attention. Figuring that the door to the apartment I was interested in was just at the cluttered end of the corridor, I breathlessly moved there. There it was, the door upholstered in brown oilcloth, apartment number 41. Doorknob, keyholes, peephole, nothing special. I stopped a few feet from the door, trying to collect my thoughts. What am I doing here? What am I about to do? I was shivering violently. I just stood there, stupidly shifting my gaze from the door to the wheelchair and back again. At some point, I suddenly realized that I could hear something else besides my heavy sniffling. I held my breath and listened. The sound came from behind the door of apartment 41 and was clearly getting closer. Before I realized what it was, the sounds had died down. There was a tense silence. The thoughts in my head moved very slowly. I realized I'd heard his shuffling footsteps. He had come to the door and was now standing behind it. At that moment, the doorknob began to twist rapidly, and the door seemed to be getting a good pounding from the inside, judging by the way it rattled. I, as you put it here, threw bricks out and ran as fast as I could out of there. I don't remember how I got down from the 8th floor, but I can tell you one thing very fast. Only when I was running out of the entrance could I pull myself together. I had enough sense not to run straight to my house, but to make a detour around the block to confuse my tracks. I was home in 10 minutes. Without taking off my shoes, I ran into my room, grabbed my rifle, aimed at his window, and that's when I got really scared. He was standing at the window, scrubbing his hands over the glass, and I'll be damned if he wasn't staring right at me. I only saw him for a second, but what I saw I'll never forget. A skinny, elongated body, bones showing through the pale skin, long arms with gnarled fingers scraping at the glass, a tiny ugly noseless face on a huge, almost white, hairless head, two big dark eyes and a mouth with no lips. His hands moved, his mouth opened and closed, leaving wet marks on the glass, and his eyes looked exactly at me. I could just feel that gaze. You know, even though my brain was paralyzed with terror at that moment, my body knew what to do. As if in a dream, I recoiled from the window and rushed to the closet where I kept a box of ammunition. 10 seconds later, I returned with an already loaded Remington. I didn't care what came after. With a flip of the bolt, I jumped up and quickly took the window in my sights. In the crosshairs I saw only swaying, tightly drawn curtains. I moved out of the apartment the same day. I paid the landlord, he didn't ask any questions, and I was grateful for that. Focusing on work, I lived for a few months. Things started to go away. Occasionally I thought of him. I realized why he was sitting facing the wall. He was seated that way, on purpose, so he wouldn't see other people. Who is he? I don't know. Is he dangerous? I think he's definitely dangerous. Sometimes I see him in my dreams. He's knocking on my door, and I watch him through the peephole, and my rifle misfires over and over in these dreams. I don't like that he saw me then. Am I afraid? I have a gun, and I can stand up for myself. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared,